The morning sun had barely crested the oak trees when I heard the whistle of an arrow cutting through the air. Then came the sound that will haunt me forever, the desperate cry of an animal in pain, followed by the triumphant laughter of a woman who had just destroyed 5 years of scientific research with a single shot. I ran through the wet grass, my heart pounding as I followed the blood trail that led deeper into my property. What I found there changed everything. A magnificent buck, the crown jewel of our university wildlife program, was struggling to stand with a GPS collar hanging in shattered pieces around his neck. Karen Thompson stood 30 yards away, bow in hand, grinning like she had just won the lottery. She had no idea that her moment of recreational fun had just made her a federal criminal. That was the moment I realized that some neighbors are not just difficult, some neighbors are dangerous. My name is David, and for 8 years I lived in what I thought was paradise. 40 acres of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and meadows that stretched toward the horizon like something from a postcard. The property sat on the edge of what used to be endless farmland, where wildlife roamed freely, and the only sounds were wind through the grass and the occasional call of a red-tailed hawk. I bought this land with my life savings after retiring from 20 years as a wildlife biologist. The plan was simple: create a sanctuary where I could study animal behavior, contribute to conservation research, and live in harmony with the natural world I had spent my career trying to protect. The deer were my favorite visitors, a small herd of about 12 animals that had been using this land as their home range for generations. They would graze in my pastures at dawn and dusk, their white tails flicking as they moved through the tall grass with a grace that never failed to take my breath away. 3 years ago, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Chen from the State University. She was leading a groundbreaking study on deer migration patterns and climate adaptation. The research required long-term monitoring of individual animals using GPS collars that could track their movements for years. "Your property is perfect," she told me as we walked through the meadow. "It sits right in the middle of their migration corridor. If we can establish a research site here, we could gather data that changes how we understand wildlife adaptation to urban sprawl." I agreed immediately. The research would not interfere with my daily life, and I would be contributing to science while protecting the animals I loved. We selected 3 deer for the program, including a magnificent 10-point buck that Dr. Chen called Alpha. He was the leader of the herd, the one who decided when to move and where to graze. Alpha wore a high-tech collar worth $15,000, packed with GPS sensors, accelerometers, and satellite communication equipment. Every movement he made was recorded and transmitted to servers at the university, creating a detailed map of his daily life. For 3 years, everything was perfect. I would wake up each morning and check the research app on my phone, watching Alpha's movements from the night before. Sometimes he would be grazing near my house. Other times he would be miles away, following ancient deer paths that had been used for centuries. Then the developers came. Hillcrest Estates started construction on the adjoining property in the spring. What had once been a working farm became a maze of concrete foundations and construction equipment. The sounds of hammering and diesel engines replaced bird songs. The smell of fresh lumber and paint filled the air where wildflowers used to bloom. I watched from my porch as they built 96 identical houses, each one a beige monument to suburban conformity. The construction took 2 years, and during that time, the deer adapted. They learned to avoid the noise during the day and found new paths around the development. I thought the worst was over when the last house was finished. I was wrong. The homeowners brought something far worse than construction noise. They brought a homeowners association, and with it came Karen Thompson. Karen Thompson was not what I expected from a neighbor. She was a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a wardrobe that looked like it came from a catalog selling suburban dreams. She drove a white BMW SUV and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Our first meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I was feeding my chickens when I heard the slam of a car door. Karen marched across my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Hello there," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am Karen Thompson, president of the Hillcrest Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss a few concerns we have about your property." I set down the chicken feed and tried to be polite. "Nice to meet you, Karen. I am David. What kind of concerns?" Her smile disappeared. "Well, we have been monitoring the wildlife situation, and frankly, it is getting out of hand. The deer are wandering into our neighborhood, eating landscaping and creating safety hazards for our children." I looked toward her development, where I could see perfectly manicured lawns and decorative plants that looked like they belonged in a garden center. "The deer have been using these migration paths for decades. They were here long before your houses." "That may be true," Karen said, flipping through papers on her clipboard, "but property values are our primary concern. We have invested significant money in creating a premier residential community, and we cannot allow wildlife to compromise that investment." She handed me a typed letter with the Hillcrest Estates logo at the top. It was a formal complaint demanding that I take immediate action to control wildlife populations on my property. The letter cited concerns about property damage, safety risks, and the potential for disease transmission. "I appreciate your concerns," I said, handing the letter back to her, "but I cannot control wild animals. They are free to roam wherever they choose, and this is my private property, not part of your HOA." Karen's face turned red. "These animals are clearly being attracted to your property through artificial feeding or habitat manipulation. As a responsible neighbor, you have an obligation to address this issue." "I do not feed the deer," I said firmly, "and I have every right to maintain my property as natural habitat. There are no laws that require me to remove wildlife from my own land." "We will see about that," Karen snapped, turning on her heel and marching back to her car. That should have been the end of it, but Karen was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, she began showing up at my property almost daily. She would park her BMW at the end of my driveway and walk around with her phone, taking photos of deer droppings, hoof prints, and anything else she could use as evidence in her campaign against my wildlife. She started a Facebook group called Hillcrest Estates Safety Watch, where she posted photos of deer in the neighborhood with captions like "dangerous wildlife invasion" and "homeowner alert, disease risk rising." She claimed that deer were attacking children, destroying property, and spreading Lyme disease. None of it was true, but her neighbors believed her. I began receiving angry phone calls from HOA members demanding that I do something about the deer problem. People who had never spoken to me before were suddenly experts on wildlife management and property law. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon in November. I was working in my garden when I heard Karen's voice coming from my back pasture. She was talking to someone on her phone, and her words made my blood run cold. "The owner refuses to cooperate," she was saying. "We need to take matters into our own hands. These animals are a threat to our community, and if he will not remove them, we will." I walked toward the sound of her voice and found her standing in my pasture, measuring distances with a tape measure. She had driven across my property without permission and was conducting what looked like a surveillance operation. "Karen, you are trespassing on my land," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked at me with pure hatred. "These deer are a menace, and I am going to make sure they are dealt with properly. You have 1 week to remove them voluntarily, or we will take legal action." "Legal action for what? They are wild animals on private property." "We will find a way," she said, walking back toward her car. "Mark my words, David, this deer problem ends now." As I watched her drive away, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. Something in her voice told me this was no longer about property values or neighborhood complaints. This was about control, and Corinne Thompson was about to learn that some things cannot be controlled. The first sign that Corinne had moved beyond complaints into something more dangerous came on a Saturday morning in December. I was checking my trail cameras when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Fresh boot prints in the mud near my property line, and they were not mine. I followed the tracks deeper into the woods and found something that sent ice through my veins. Someone had been scouting my land, marking trees and measuring distances like they were planning a military operation. That afternoon, I installed additional security cameras around my property. What I discovered over the next few days made me realize that Corinne's threats were not empty promises. The footage revealed a pattern of nighttime visits. Corinne and at least 3 other people were coming onto my land after dark, studying deer trails and setting up what looked like hunting blinds. They moved with the precision of people who had done this before, and they were clearly preparing for something. I decided to investigate Corinne's background and discovered that her husband, Frank Thompson, was an avid bow hunter. Their garage was full of archery equipment, and Frank had been posting photos on social media of his recent hunting trips. The pieces started falling into place. Corinne was not just trying to scare the deer away, she was planning to kill them. I called Dr. Chen at the university to report what I had discovered. Her reaction was immediate and alarmed. "David, those research animals are protected under federal law," she said. "Anyone who interferes with our study or harms those animals could face serious criminal charges. We need to contact the authorities immediately." But when I called the local sheriff's office, the deputy who took my report seemed uninterested. "Ma'am, unless you have proof that someone is actually hunting on your property, there is not much we can do about trespassing complaints." Corinne seemed to sense that she had the upper hand. Her visits became more brazen, and she started bringing other HOA members with her. They would walk through my property in broad daylight, taking photos and making notes like they were conducting an official investigation. The breaking point came when I discovered that Corinne had been spreading a new lie throughout the neighborhood. She was telling people that I was harboring dangerous wildlife that posed a threat to children and pets. "David is running some kind of illegal wildlife sanctuary," she posted on Facebook. "These animals are not natural to our area, and they are being artificially maintained on his property. We have children playing in our backyards, and we cannot allow this safety hazard to continue." The lies were becoming increasingly elaborate. Corinne claimed that the deer were infected with diseases, that they were being fed artificial hormones, and that I was conducting unauthorized experiments on wild animals. None of it was true, but her campaign was working. I started receiving threatening messages from neighbors who had been convinced that I was putting their families at risk. The final piece of Corinne's plan became clear when I found corn scattered along my property line. She was baiting the deer, trying to establish predictable feeding patterns that would make them easy targets. I called Dr. Chen again, and this time she agreed to contact federal wildlife authorities. "This has gone beyond harassment," she said. "If they are interfering with our research animals, they are committing federal crimes." But bureaucracy moves slowly, and Corinne was moving fast. On a cold Tuesday night in January, my security cameras captured something that made my blood run cold. Corinne, Frank, and two other men were on my property with bows and arrows, setting up in positions that would give them clear shots at the deer feeding areas. They were not just scouting anymore, they were hunting. I spent that night awake, watching the live camera feeds and waiting for something terrible to happen. The deer seemed to sense danger and stayed away from their usual feeding spots. But I knew it was only a matter of time. Corinne had moved beyond threats and complaints. She had crossed the line into something that could destroy 5 years of scientific research and kill innocent animals that had been under federal protection. The war was about to begin, and I was not sure I was ready for what was coming. The attack came at dawn on a Thursday morning in February. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I heard the whistle of an arrow cutting through the still air. Then came a sound that will stay with me forever: the desperate, panicked cry of an animal in mortal pain. I ran toward the sound, my heart pounding as I crashed through the underbrush. The security camera alerts were already flooding my phone, but I did not need technology to tell me what was happening. I could hear Corinne's voice, high and excited, celebrating her successful shot. What I found in the meadow was a scene from a nightmare. Alpha, the magnificent research buck that had been the cornerstone of Dr. Chen's study, was on the ground with an arrow protruding from his side. The GPS collar around his neck was sparking and smoking, damaged by the impact of his fall. 5 years of irreplaceable research data was dying along with him. Corinne stood 30 yards away, bow in hand, grinning like she had just won the lottery. Frank was beside her with a camera, taking photos of what they clearly considered a trophy kill. "Congratulations, honey," Frank was saying. "That was a perfect shot." I ran toward Alpha, but Corinne stepped in front of me. "Do not touch our deer," she said, her voice full of triumph. "We have every right to manage wildlife that threatens our community." "Your deer," I screamed. "This is my property, and that is a federal research animal." Corinne laughed. "Research animal? That is just a wild deer that has been damaging our property values. We are performing a community service." I knelt beside Alpha, my hands shaking as I tried to assess his injuries. The arrow had punctured his lung, and blood was foaming from his mouth. The GPS collar was completely destroyed, its expensive sensors scattered across the ground like electronic confetti. "You have no idea what you have just done," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We have solved a problem," Corinne said coldly. "These animals are pests, and we are removing them from our neighborhood." I called 911 with trembling fingers, but I knew it was too late for Alpha. The light was already fading from his eyes as I tried to comfort him in his final moments. "You killed him," I said, standing up to face Corinne. "You killed a research animal that was protected under federal law." "Prove it," Corinne snapped. "That collar could be anything. You probably put it on him yourself to try to make us look bad." But Corinne's arrogance was about to become her downfall. The GPS collar, even though it was damaged, had been transmitting data right up until the moment of impact. The university servers had recorded everything, including the exact time and location of Alpha's death. Dr. Chen arrived within an hour, followed by state wildlife officers and federal agents. Corinne's triumphant smile disappeared when she saw the badges and official vehicles filling my driveway. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for interference with federal wildlife research," the lead agent said, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is ridiculous," Corinne screamed as they led her away. "I was protecting my neighborhood from dangerous wildlife. That deer was a threat to our children." Frank tried to run, but the officers caught him before he reached his truck. The other two men surrendered without resistance, their faces pale with the realization that their fun hunting trip had just become a federal crime. Dr. Chen knelt beside Alpha's body, her professional composure cracking as she saw 5 years of research destroyed in a single moment of recreational cruelty. "This was our primary research subject," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He was the alpha male of the herd, the one who made decisions for the entire group. His behavioral data was irreplaceable." The GPS collar had been worth $15,000, but the data it contained was priceless. Alpha's movement patterns had been providing insights into how wildlife adapts to urban development, information that could help save countless animals in the future. Corinne had destroyed all of it for the sake of what she called community service. As the authorities processed the crime scene, I sat beside Alpha's body and felt a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was not just the death of an animal. This was the murder of scientific progress, the destruction of knowledge that could have helped protect wildlife for generations. Corinne Thompson had declared war on my animals, and she had no idea that she had just made herself an enemy of the federal government. The real justice was just beginning. The call came from Dr. Chen 2 days after Alpha's death. Her voice was tense with barely controlled fury as she explained the true scope of what Corinne had destroyed. "David, we need to meet immediately. The federal authorities have completed their initial investigation, and the charges against Corinne are more serious than we initially thought." I drove to the university campus, where Dr. Chen was waiting in her office with Agent Martinez from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The conference table was covered with printouts, photographs, and legal documents that painted a picture of Corinne's crimes in stark detail. "Mrs. Thompson is facing multiple federal charges," Agent Martinez explained. "Interference with federal wildlife research, destruction of government property, and conspiracy to commit wildlife crimes. But that is just the beginning." Dr. Chen pulled up a computer screen showing the financial breakdown of Corinne's actions. The numbers made my head spin. "The GPS collar she destroyed was worth $15,000, Dr. Chen said. "But the data loss is catastrophic. We are talking about 5 years of research involving 3 universities, 12 graduate students, and over $2 million in federal grant funding." Agent Martinez nodded grimly. "The research program will have to be restarted from scratch. The university is estimating total damages at $4.7 million. I felt dizzy. Corinne has to pay $4.7 million. "She is liable for the full amount," Agent Martinez said, "plus criminal penalties that could include up to 5 years in federal prison." But the financial implications were just the beginning. The investigation had uncovered evidence that Corinne's actions were part of a larger pattern of wildlife harassment that had been going on for months. "We found illegal hunting blinds, bait stations, and surveillance equipment throughout your property," Agent Martinez continued. "Mrs. Thompson and her accomplices were operating what amounts to an illegal hunting operation on private land." The security camera footage told the whole story. Karen and her group had been planning Alpha's death for weeks, studying his movement patterns and setting up kill zones designed to make him an easy target. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, Dr. Chen said, her voice shaking with anger. They hunted him like he was a trophy animal in a private game preserve. The legal ramifications extended beyond just Karen and Frank. The entire HOA was now under investigation for their role in supporting and funding Karen's actions. We have evidence that HOA dues were used to purchase hunting equipment and surveillance gear, Agent Martinez explained. Every member of the association could be held liable for damages. Karen's Facebook posts and meeting minutes provided a paper trail of conspiracy that implicated dozens of homeowners in the plot to eliminate the deer population. She documented everything, Agent Martinez said with amazement. It is like she wanted to be caught. The investigation also revealed that Karen had been lying about her credentials and authority. She had been claiming to have government approval for her wildlife management program, but no such approval existed. She was telling neighbors that she was working with state wildlife officials to control deer populations, Agent Martinez said. We have no record of any communication with Mrs. Thompson or her organization. The university was preparing to file a civil lawsuit that would seek damages not just for the destroyed equipment and data, but for the long-term impact on conservation research. This study was providing crucial information about wildlife adaptation to climate change, Dr. Chen explained. The data Alpha was generating could have influenced policy decisions that affect millions of animals across the country. The federal charges were just the beginning. State wildlife officials were filing additional charges for illegal hunting, trespassing, and animal cruelty. The local prosecutor was considering charges for criminal mischief and conspiracy. Karen's legal troubles were compounding by the day, but her response was to double down on her claims of innocence. She is telling anyone who will listen that she was protecting the community from dangerous wildlife, Agent Martinez said. Her lawyer is trying to argue that she was acting in self-defense. But the evidence was overwhelming. The GPS data showed that Alpha had never left my property on the day he was killed. The security footage showed that Karen and her group had trespassed onto my land specifically to hunt him. There is no legal justification for what she did, Agent Martinez said firmly. This was premeditated destruction of federal research, and she is going to face the full consequences. As I drove home from the university, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was coming for Karen, but it would not bring Alpha back. 5 years of research was gone forever, along with the insights that could have helped protect countless other animals. Karen had started a war against wildlife, and she was about to learn that some battles cannot be won with arrogance and entitlement. The federal government does not negotiate with people who destroy scientific research for sport. The first sign that Karen's perfect suburban life was crumbling came 3 weeks after Alpha's death. I was checking my mail when I saw the moving truck parked in front of her house. Karen was standing in her driveway, arguing with 2 men in suits while Frank loaded boxes into the truck. The legal bills were already destroying her financially. Her lawyer had demanded a $50,000 retainer just to begin her defense, and that was before the federal charges were even formally filed. The civil lawsuit from the university was seeking damages that would bankrupt her family for generations. I watched from my porch as Karen's perfect life was dismantled piece by piece. The BMW was the first thing to go, replaced by a 15-year-old Honda that looked like it had seen better days. Then came the designer furniture, the expensive artwork, and finally the house itself. Frank had tried to distance himself from Corinne's actions, but the conspiracy charges made that impossible. He had been equally involved in planning and executing the illegal hunt, and his own social media posts had provided prosecutors with evidence of premeditation. "I just wanted to help my wife solve a neighborhood problem," he told reporters outside the courthouse. "I had no idea we were breaking federal laws." But ignorance was not a defense, and Frank's hunting experience actually made his charges more serious. As an experienced bow hunter, he should have known that killing wildlife on private property without permission was illegal. The HOA was in complete chaos. Emergency meetings were called almost daily, as homeowners realized that their association with Corinne's actions could result in massive financial liability for everyone. "We demand Corinne Thompson's immediate resignation from all HOA positions," read a petition signed by 87 of the 96 homeowners. "Her reckless actions have put our entire community at legal and financial risk." But Corinne refused to go quietly. Her response to the mounting pressure was to launch a social media campaign that made her look increasingly unhinged. "I am being persecuted for protecting our children," she posted on Facebook. "The government is trying to silence me because I expose the truth about dangerous wildlife infiltration in our neighborhood." Her posts became more paranoid and desperate with each passing day. She claimed that I was part of a government conspiracy to destroy property values. She insisted that the research program was a cover for illegal animal experiments. She even suggested that the federal agents were corrupt officials trying to cover up their own crimes. "David and his government friends are trying to frame me," she wrote in a post that was shared hundreds of times. "They want to silence anyone who speaks out against their radical environmental agenda." The posts were screenshot and shared as evidence of Corinne's deteriorating mental state. Her lawyer tried to get her to stop, but Corinne was beyond reasoning. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for April, but Corinne's case was falling apart before it even reached court. The GPS data, security footage, and witness testimony created an unshakable case against her. "Mrs. Thompson has no viable defense," her lawyer admitted to reporters. "We are exploring plea bargain options to minimize her sentence." But Corinne refused to accept any deal that required her to admit guilt. She insisted that she was the victim of a government conspiracy designed to destroy her family and community. "I will not plead guilty to protecting my neighborhood," she declared at a press conference outside the courthouse. "I did what any responsible homeowner would do when faced with dangerous wildlife." Her delusions were becoming more elaborate by the day. She claimed that Alpha had been genetically modified to be more aggressive. She insisted that the GPS collar was actually a mind control device. She even suggested that the deer were being used as biological weapons by environmental terrorists. The media coverage of Corinne's statements was devastating. She became a national symbol of HOA overreach and suburban entitlement. Late-night talk show hosts mocked her claims about mind-controlled deer. Social media users created memes about her conspiracy theories. "Corinne Thompson represents everything that is wrong with suburban America," wrote one columnist. "Her arrogance and sense of entitlement led her to believe that she could commit federal crimes and face no consequences." The community that had once supported her now wanted nothing to do with her. The HOA voted unanimously to expel her from the organization and ban her from any future involvement in neighborhood affairs. Karen Thompson is no longer welcome in Hillcrest Estates, read an official statement from the HOA board. Her actions have brought shame and financial liability to our entire community. Even her own family was abandoning her. Frank filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking to protect his assets from Karen's legal troubles. I cannot continue to be married to someone who refuses to accept responsibility for her actions, Frank told the court. Karen has lost touch with reality, and I fear for my own financial security. Karen's response was to blame everyone else for her situation. She claimed that Frank was weak and cowardly. She insisted that her neighbors were jealous of her leadership abilities. She accused the media of spreading lies about her character. But reality was closing in around her, and there was nowhere left to run. The woman who had once commanded respect as HOA president was now a laughingstock facing federal prison time and financial ruin. Her war against the deer had destroyed everything she claimed to be protecting. The courtroom was packed on the morning of Karen's sentencing. Federal Judge Patricia Williams had a reputation for being tough on environmental crimes, and Karen's refusal to accept responsibility had not earned her any sympathy. I sat in the front row, watching as Karen entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. She had been in custody for 2 weeks after violating her bail conditions by attempting to contact potential witnesses. Her perfect suburban appearance was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who had finally realized the true consequences of her actions. Dr. Chen testified about the impact of Karen's crimes on the research program. Her voice was steady but emotional as she explained how 5 years of irreplaceable data had been lost in a single moment of recreational cruelty. Alpha was not just a research subject, Dr. Chen said. He was the key to understanding how wildlife adapts to human development. His death set back conservation science by decades. The university's financial expert testified about the economic impact of Karen's actions. The total damages exceeded $5 million when accounting for lost research, destroyed equipment, and the cost of restarting the program. Mrs. Thompson's actions destroyed one of the most important wildlife studies in North America, the expert explained. The research she terminated could have saved countless animals from extinction. Karen's lawyer made a final attempt to portray her as a misguided homeowner who had acted out of concern for her community. But Judge Williams was not buying it. Mrs. Thompson, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this situation legally, the judge said. Instead, you chose to take the law into your own hands and destroy valuable scientific research. Your actions were premeditated, destructive, and showed a complete disregard for the law. The sentence was devastating. 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Full restitution of $4.7 million to the university. A lifetime ban from serving in any HOA leadership position. Karen's face went white as the judge read the sentence. She started to speak, but her lawyer quickly silenced her. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, you are banned from owning any hunting equipment and prohibited from entering any property where wildlife research is being conducted. The criminal case was over, but the civil lawsuits were just beginning. The university was seeking additional damages for the long-term impact on conservation research. Environmental groups were filing lawsuits seeking punitive damages for the destruction of protected wildlife. Frank had already agreed to a plea deal that required him to pay $200,000 in restitution and serve 2 years of probation. His divorce from Karen was finalized the same week as her sentencing. The other two men who had participated in the illegal hunt received lesser sentences but were still facing financial ruin. The conspiracy charges had made them all equally liable for the full amount of damages. The Hillcrest Estates HOA was dissolved 6 months after Corinne's sentencing. The legal liability had made it impossible for the organization to continue operating. Several homeowners had filed bankruptcy to avoid paying their share of the restitution. But the most satisfying part of the story was what happened to my property after Corinne's arrest. Dr. Chen and I worked together to establish a new research program that would honor Alpha's memory while advancing conservation science. The university provided funding for expanded facilities, including a research station that would host graduate students and visiting scientists. "We are calling it the Alpha Research Center," Dr. Chen told me as we watched construction crews building the new facility. "It will be a permanent memorial to the animal that Corinne destroyed." The new program attracted researchers from around the world who wanted to study wildlife adaptation to urban development. My 40 acres became a model for how private landowners could contribute to conservation science. The deer herd had slowly recovered from the trauma of Alpha's death. A younger buck had taken over as the group's leader, and the research program was providing new insights into how wildlife communities rebuild after losing key individuals. Alpha's data is still helping us understand deer behavior, Dr. Chen explained. Even in death, he is contributing to conservation science. Corinne's social media accounts had been deleted, but her story lived on as a cautionary tale about the dangers of HOA overreach and suburban entitlement. Law schools used her case to teach students about environmental crime. Conservation groups used her example to advocate for stronger protections for wildlife research. As I watched the sun set over my restored sanctuary, I reflected on the lessons learned from Corinne's war against the deer. Some people believe that owning property gives them the right to control everything around them. They see wildlife as a problem to be solved rather than a treasure to be protected. Corinne Thompson had tried to impose her vision of suburban perfection on the natural world, and it had cost her everything. Her perfect life was gone, her family was destroyed, and her community was in ruins. But the deer were still here, grazing peacefully in the meadow where Alpha had once led his herd. The research program was stronger than ever, and the knowledge gained from studying these animals would help protect wildlife for generations to come. Justice had been served, not through revenge or retribution, but through the simple act of allowing nature to reclaim its rightful place in the world. Corinne had learned too late that some wars cannot be won, especially when you are fighting against the very forces that give life meaning and purpose. The deer had won, and the world was a better place for it.